This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation. This week, we are going to talk about the quality control response to COVID disruptions in laboratories. So COVID, as everyone is well aware now, has changed nearly every facet of society. And many of the changes, will be permanent, and we won't go back to the way things were. So not returning to the old ways. Well, what does that mean? While we often take comfort in the status quo, this pandemic has allowed us many positives too, including better digital capabilities and a better understanding of technological implications on drug development. New knowledge, new ways of working and collaborating, and improved methods of adaptability make this a perfect time to consider evolving our laboratories to meet new demands and maximize patient safety. So today we speak with Brian Nunally for some updates and insights on laboratory operations. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thank you so much, Stacey. I really appreciate you having me back. You must have liked it the first time, bringing me back again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Fun conversations and always so insightful. We don't spend a lot of time talking about COVID impacts on laboratory here at IVT, but it certainly is so important to understand what that might look like going forward. So glad you could join us and help us get a better vision of that.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So Brian, just to kick us off, what changes that we see due to COVID have mandated a change of thinking in terms of laboratory design? So let's talk about the big picture, right? How we lay out the laboratory and what have we seen change?
Yeah, it's funny when you think about COVID. It's just all encompassing. Every part of society, you talked about, every society is really changing, and the laboratory really is no different. I think assumptions that we made in the past are not assumptions that we can make. I think back to my days when I was at the bench. We would have people sitting right next to each other, and you would put equipment all in the same place. Like you would want, your heavily trafficked equipment, you might have in the same place because you put all the balances, for instance, in the same place. Well, I'm not sure that that's the paradigm that we need to occupy today with a COVID in mind. Certainly the thought process of having a collection of folks that sit right next to each other is not something we want to see. We want social distancing. And so, sometimes with sharing of reagents and pipettes may get a little more challenging. We may find that the closeness with which we occupied may need to have a plexiglass between us. And, I think COVID has, in my mind, is a seismic shift. We really are changing the way we're thinking about things. But in essence, in a small way, it's taking us back to what we used to know and what we always did. And we go back to lean principles. Everybody in the laboratory loves to talk lean, and I'm a lean guy, right? I'm a Six Sigma, and this, we've got a book with my buddy John McConnell, Six Sigma in the pharmaceutical industry, that it talks about this kind of lean concept in Six Sigma, but it's all about variability reduction. That's what we're really talking about. But lean is bigger than reduction. And one of the things it talks about is waste and flow, and wanting to have a flow through the laboratory. And so you can do spaghetti diagrams, which look at how you work through the laboratory and you walk through, and you want to put heavily trafficked things in places where people go right by. Well, COVID might change that spaghetti diagram. Instead of thinking about things in terms of how can we ensure people are flowing in one direction, how can we make sure that people aren't having to congregate next to each other? Putting something that's heavily trafficked right next to where someone has to sit and work is probably not a good idea. I think it's going to pretty fundamentally change the way that we even design every bit of work that we do in the laboratory. And when we're having to change this on the fly, and it's been a big challenge, especially when you've got a situation where if you have a lot of fixed benches and things that in places, it's really hard.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, it sounds like the equipment's going to be spaced out, the workstations are going to be spaced out more so. And you know what? It's interesting as you were talking about COVID, this response because of COVID. I'm thinking about the flu season, which is, upon us too. And that sort of social distancing and mindful station, setup is going to also help with other diseases like the common cold and the flu too, right? The transmission of those in the workplace. So not a bad shift when you really think about it.
No, not at all. And I think we're going to see even shifts. We talked about design and very the physical aspects, but I think there's also the personnel aspects of this to think about. And it's created this, when I'll tell you a quick story. Before the pandemic started, back in when it seems like, so back in the fall of 2019, I was asked by someone, what are you most concerned about in your laboratories? And I told them I'm worried about a pandemic. Now, I was thinking about a flu pandemic, frankly, so I'm not going to take any credit for something that I saw something that no one else did. Right. But I was worried about a flu pandemic. I was worried about a flu pandemic and taking analysts out of the laboratory in a very unpredictable way. Does that sound familiar? It's exactly the situation we're living right now. And the things that we can learn from this, better hygiene and wearing masks and not coming in when you're sick, things like this, I think, can really help us, like you said, with other communicable kind of diseases, and maybe we end up with a healthier state because of, I'm certainly that's where I hope we end up.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. I think we're getting there. Well, at least in some environments. Yeah. And you mentioned that, not just the facility or the lab itself, the way we design it is going to change, but personnel is going to change too. And I'm wondering if you can describe how the work will look different. With new norms, should we expect team interactions to look different as well?
Well, this is one of that it troubles me, as I think a lot about. Science is about collaboration. It's always been about collaboration. It's about working together and bringing the best minds together and talking about problems together and solving problems together. I keep using that word, together. And, we're in a situation now where we're separating ourselves and we're having to pull ourselves apart, and together is a different concept. And it's observed differently and executed differently than we were before. So I think trying to find, in my mind, it's going to look like, I think we're going to see together is going to take meaning. Together might mean working virtually like we're doing now.
Right.
And having this conversation might mean collaborating with smart glasses, that we have these little glasses you can put on and you can see what the person is doing. And instead of hopping a plane, we might have smart glasses on in one location and a computer screen in the other location where someone is working. We've already demonstrated that in Seqirus. We've already used that technology successfully during the pandemic. So some of the work, what we used to do is going to have to change as a result of this. And I think maybe for the better. Maybe we're going to learn some new habits and some things that we can utilize that will make us more effective. I hope and pray that it doesn't, that we don't lose that ability to connect with people, because that is always so critical. Even this pandemic has taught us how important our people relationships are. And in the laboratory, I like to think about laboratory people as not people, but I think there is a connectedness that science really, and I think a laboratory is a little like a heartbeat, and there's a rhythm to it, and there's a lifeblood in it. And I think when you start to separate people out like we've had to, you lose something in that. And so my hope is certainly that we're going to learn some things that are going to make us better, and some simple things like some separation, where we put things, how we structure shifts, and how we allow people to be next to each other. But we get creative and don't lose those things that are so important in the relation and the connectedness that we so really need.
Absolutely, I 100% agree with that. And I think we've all become masters of the Zoom meeting or the Teams meeting or whatever your online
platform
choice is, right? But it has allowed us to stay connected, to continue to work collaboratively, to continue to have those conversations and get that feedback. And I want to talk a little bit more about some of the digital solutions. I mean, you mentioned smart glasses, but we've, as an industry, been for years now trying to get a little bit more digital savvy, right? We've been moving away from paper labs, embracing digital data capture, those kinds of things. And as you mentioned, the pandemic just really accelerated that process for so many organizations, whether in their labs or on their manufacturing lines. And some of this has eliminated the need for people to be hands-on in certain tasks. We don't want to remove all of those interactions where people come together with people, but sometimes it might be appropriate to do so. And I just want to get your perspective on that. How do we continue to optimize our digital lab processes, but still maintain that really important people component?
Absolutely. And, I don't ever envision a lab of the future that doesn't involve people.
Right.
And I know we always talk about automation replacing everything, and this idea of a cloud laboratory that sits off somewhere and you send it, you click, in, Palo Verde, and you click a button and it makes, something go in Nashville.
Right.
I don't know that I'm certainly not there. Maybe I'm a little too old for this kind of stuff, but I got to tell you, I think the people, again, I do think of that as a heartbeat in an organism that like that. And I agree, your statement is 100% correct. I think the pandemic has accelerated everything that we were thinking about with digital solutions. We were starting with trying to get rid of paper for a long time ago, before the pandemic.
Right.
But boy, I tell you what, since the pandemic, it's really accelerated, because if you can find ways that you don't need people to be there, have to be right next to someone else. If you can find creative solutions to, so that you can look at information without having to be right on top of the person. And so I can envision having an analyst wearing smart glasses, a verifier being located somewhere, and they're execution. So they've got an iPad that's sitting there that has gone through with all their procedures, and they filled everything in along the way, and can look at all that and say, show me the solution you use. Show me, I don't have to look at the pipette bin because you scanned it and it's already there. So I don't have pipette bin you used. And they're able to do all of the work. Largely, they could do it almost completely remotely. And I think digital capture and being able to have things that go directly to limbs into a information management system. I mean, these are the kinds of things in my mind that we're seeing acceleration on. And, the lab of the future is going to be a highly connected lab, and really kind of get involved and get heavily involved with that, so that we're able to, see things through without the need for function. It's a dream, I admit, but maybe we've got a chance to get there.
I think so. And I think that now more than ever, as an industry, we're starting to trust in the technology and embrace the technology. But we still have to figure out how it's going to work best in our own given situations, depending on the organization, depending on the lab, depending on the product. Can you, from your experience, Brian, in your lab or in labs that you've been working in or with, can you give us an example of how this type of integration impacts method execution and then instrument interfaces?
So, it's funny, that's a really interesting thing. And I think we've seen, we're still on the early stages of this. We're on the precipice of kind of pulling this together. And, I've seen it in the past, I've seen it work with other people, and it's really neat, I think, because it puts you in a really good, I know everybody that's listening to this podcast is really concerned about compliance. And from a compliance perspective, right, we want to make sure that we are doing things and we don't miss. So in a digital method execution situation, you can, if you scan in something and it doesn't get what it expects, it will stop you and it forces you to resolve that. End up in a deviation situation. You can't use this pipette. Why is it not letting me do it? Oh, that's a P1000. I'm supposed to use a P200. And
Yeah.
so it will stop you from an analyst perspective. Wonderful, because you don't have to worry about any investigation for something that is not a problem, right? And I think from the ability of transcription errors go away, we don't have any possibility of transcription errors because things are going through the system.
Right.
And so there's a lot of advantages that you can look at that don't just involve getting, moving things digitally and getting rid of paper and not having people around. You get a lot of advantages just from the execution perspective and limiting your deviations that you can have.
Yeah, which is so important, for sure. And so from that perspective, kind of still on that same theme for a minute, what tools and technology should or can be introduced to make remote collaboration more effective? Given that we have all these digital capabilities, what talk to me about the lab. Like, what are we seeing there?
I am really bullish on classes, and I mentioned them earlier, and we've seen work for us in the pandemic. All of a sudden, right, everything stopped traveling. People couldn't come to work. A lot of things changed in a very rapid time frame. And we had already been talking about the smart glasses. We kind of heard some things about them. And for those that aren't familiar, these are glasses that you put on, and they're probably the biggest negative I've heard on them is they're a little heavy. And so you put these glasses on, and you have a little kind of thing over your eye right here, and you have the other eye, and you look at something, and a person on a computer screen anywhere in the world can see what you're looking at. Oh. And so when travel got disrupted, we had a situation where we were transferring assays, or we're trying to transfer assays to a laboratory. Well, train people when you can't go to them. You've got countries that are on, and they're not letting people into their country or out for that matter.
Yeah.
And it's not, and the other thing I would look at, it's not safe. It wasn't safe for our analysts to be going between, and that's important. Safety is the most important of where you start foundationally on safety.
Right.
So finding an alternative was really cool. And so having these smart glasses, am I going to tell you it's as effective as the actually sitting next to someone and watching? Of course not. It's not as effective. The virtual environment will never be as effective as the face-to-face contact. But if you're in a situation where there isn't another option, it's a darn good one. And it ended up working out very effectively for us. We did a lot of training via smart glasses. We were able to have a very successful first season and first working with this laboratory because of this technology that I'm not sure how we would have, otherwise it probably would have been someone having to read an SOP and to execute that way and learn just by reading, which is it's a great way. You can do that, but that's not the way I want to do it. And it's not the way any analyst wants to really learn how to do it.
Yeah, it's not the most effective. I mean, we've seen that over and over again, the read and retain, whatever, like most people don't learn that way. At least not in a not a concept in its entirety.
For sure.
No,
they're to run a quality control laboratory, not the way you want to be.
For sure. And it's funny, as you're talking about this technology, the smart glasses, I mean, what an amazing tool, first of all. But I'm thinking about all of the upside for sustainability efforts too. I mean, no longer do you have to put a team potentially on a plane to fly halfway around the world to collaborate. If you need someone on site, maybe you send one person and the rest of the team remote views in or uses the glasses or whatever. So it's great from the perspective of social distancing and following those kinds of protocols, but it's also really good. It makes a lot of sense for businesses financially and sustainability wise too. So
it sure does. It's very green. It's a very green technology, obviously, but right, because you're not flying plane miles, and frankly, it's cheap. I mean, not terribly expensive. Talking about travel, relative to the cost of a travel, you can buy many pairs of these glasses for what you will often pay even one person just to travel for a week. So yeah, it's very cost-effective kind of solution. Like I said, not as ideal as having someone face to face, but boy, I tell you what, if you have to, it's a great.
Yeah, it's a great second for sure. Fantastic, Brian. So we heard some great information about digital solutions, whether they're tools, technologies that we're incorporating. I want to talk a little bit more about business continuity. Throughout the pandemic, starting very early on and continuing to this day, we hear almost daily issues around supply chain challenges. And of course, laboratories experience the same kinds of challenges with supply chain as all other industries. So what kind of planning needs to happen to mitigate stoppages or delays?
This is one of the things that I think when we first started the pandemic, it wasn't present on my mind that, oh my gosh, we better make sure we have plenty of pipette tips. But it makes sense, right? If you're doing all the billions of COVID tests that you're doing, it makes sense you're going to need some pipette tips to do that. So I think we saw, and we're seeing this in a lot of industries. Our industry is no different than many others.
Of course.
But we had some real challenges with some pretty mundane, regular kinds of things in the laboratory. Pipette tips, as an example.
Glass
vials, another example. So we had all these things that you would take for granted. I took for granted my entire career.
Right.
And so for us, what we found a couple of things that we were very effective. One was obviously stockpiling. If you have something that's a durable good that will last a long time, buying ahead and buying lots of it. That has consequence. Obviously, you have to spend money ahead, which can be, depending on budgets and things, can be very difficult.
Right.
And space, where are you going to store it? You got to put it somewhere, and laboratory space is very precious. And so utilizing that for storage, not always the best thing, of course, but it's something you've got to do. The other thing that we found that was very effective, we found a lot of I'm very proud. I have a global purvey, and I have a lot of people throughout the globe. And we found that there were some countries were able to get supplies that we weren't able to get in other countries. And so we found that we were starting to ship things across those lines and collaborate together. And it was great because you saw people that probably should have been interacting together, got a chance to interact together, and that you form some bonds through that experience. But it definitely, I think the collaboration and cooperation is great for a larger company like ourselves. It's a little easier. Obviously, if you're a small company, the two things I mentioned can be very difficult. So if you're in that situation, then my other recommendation, and you don't have the space and you're not a large laboratory to be able to do that, is to look for lots of suppliers. And one of the things to keep in mind, of course, is sometimes one supplier is getting from the same origin source. So really try to understand your supply chain. You have to really get in there. If you can't buy ahead, you don't have the ability to do that, or you don't have a global network to draw from, you really got to get in detail and understand where are they buying their materials from, to make sure when you have a redundant supplier that you aren't really just having two people that are buying from the same original supplier.
Right.
And so really all you're getting, you have no redundancy at all. And so I think that's and work with the vendors. They're very collaborative. They'll work with you, and sometimes you can end up reserving some stock and paying for some things and storing it with them. The solutions that they can offer if you work with them. They're problem solvers just like we are, and they want the business, right? So they're happy to help solve the problems.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I was just thinking, we in the manufacturing side of things, we hear that just in time was something that a lot of manufacturers were subscribing to, but now you almost can't really be just in time. You can't wait in a lot of cases, right? You have to think and plan ahead for some of these supplies, because you may end up waiting twice as long or 3 times as long as you have in the past. So you have to rethink all of those processes. And I love how you were talking about, team members across countries or across states who were having the opportunity to collaborate and work together to solve the supply chain problems. Do you think that there are processes or procedures regarding personnel that need to be included in sort of planning for continuity, as similar to what you were just mentioning?
Absolutely. When I was thinking about the pandemic, you remember I said I was worried most about a pandemic. What I was worried about was whole shifts going out for,
Right.
and we saw this happen, right? Is if one
Absolutely.
person has COVID, and COVID's an interesting disease from the fact that you can have no symptoms, or you can be asymptomatic, symptomatic, and be spreading the disease. And so you have a very real potential for a person coming in, not knowing and very much naively and meaning to in any way, spreading to a whole shift. And you could lose every person you got trained on an assay. Then what do? You've lost them for quarantine. And depending on the country, that could be very long.
Yeah. 10
So
days,
this was
2
a real
weeks.
problem. Yes, exactly. And that for some businesses, certainly the food business, that is not acceptable. That just isn't acceptable. And on many businesses, I would think it's not acceptable.
Agreed.
So, we had to learn cross training was real important. About cross training, think about it not just as cross training in terms of, oh, I need to make sure someone else in the micro department is able to run sterility. You might want to think about somebody in the chemistry department that's in the other hall is able to run sterility so that they're completely segregated, so that if there's any kind of, you lose people there, you have some options. Think about having other laboratories that you go through the regulatory process of getting their approval so that you can send samples there. So that could be, say, a third-party laboratory or one of your own laboratories in another location. Help out with things like that. So it really comes down to, this, not just we talk social distancing and thinking about that aspect of planning and business continuity, but it's also making sure that you've got more supply of people if you need them, that you're putting shifts. And I'll tell you, one of the things, a big watch out for, one of the things we learned is you have to think about every little detail. Of a certain age that, the Challenger explosion, January 28th, 1986, just a few days ago, right? We're taping this, happened. And I've studied that intently. If you've never have, it's really, I recommend you can, get the information, freedom of information. You can get it from the federal government. You can read all the reports and everything like that. And I mean, we're talking a structure that was over 300 feet tall, and it was a little gasket, a quarter of an inch in size, that caused no detail is too small. You have to get into this and really understand everything that's going on. And so when you think about that level of detail, it's really going through and understanding, that one thing that we learned was you got to think about the canteens. Where do people go when they're not in the laboratory? Where do they go? Where do they go to eat lunch?
Right.
Are they, how are you spacing out where they eat lunch or where they get a cup of coffee? Or, how are you spacing where they write up? How are your cubicles? You've got to think about all the things. That's not anything to do with laboratory testing, but it's everything you need to think about when you're talking to people and making sure operations are going to continue.
Yeah, no, and it applies across industry, not just in the pharmaceutical industry.
For sure.
Because every business is having to rethink about their lunchrooms or their common spaces, common areas, and how they can help mitigate the spread of COVID, but other disease, virus, whatever, too. I mean, that's
don't forget flu. Like you said, you said it earlier. We can't forget about flu. It's out there too. And you hear people, the flurona, right? Flu and corona. It boggles the mind. Forget flu's out there too.
I know. And we did, we were lucky last year in the sense that we were all not really going anywhere. So the chances of getting the flu were much lower than they are in any other given year. But I don't think that's going to be the case again.
We can't count on that. And we are just about getting overdue for a flu pandemic, to say it. But if you look at back in time and you look at the frequency of things, it's coming.
Right. Unfortunately, I think you're right.
Unfortunately.
So, Brian, one of the other, and we've actually mentioned it a couple of times already in this discussion, but one of the other facets of business that was really impacted was travel. And, I know that you talked a little bit about having some of your teams have to use the smart glasses and work virtually, across the globe. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on whether you think, or what kinds of technologies, I guess, other than the smart glasses, I know you're a big fan of those, can be used to effectively deliver virtual training or other necessary activities. Because here we are, more than 2 years into this pandemic. And of course, businesses of all kinds have had to hire. They've lost some folks, so they've had to rehire or hire new and train or retrain. And I want to get your thoughts on the technologies really that can support a business in doing those kinds of activities.
Yeah, I'm, the smart glass are obviously one I've talked about. Let me talk about another technology. I think it's a digital method of execution. And I've talked a little the iPad, and I had instead of a paper procedure that walks you through the procedure. What's neat about that, and I didn't mention this, I mentioned that you have to fill things out and make sure all the information you need is right there. You can't go forward unless that information is populated. But what's neat about that as well is you can bring in media as part of that. So when you're thinking about this, one of the things that you can do is obviously you have the ability to, we used to do this all the time. You videotape the assay, or you can digitally tape the assay being performed, and you can get different angles and produce that. What's nice about that, you can embed that in the digital methods of execution. So if you have a tricky step or something that's really important that the technique is done, you can embed a video there that the analyst can watch if they want or not. They don't have to, you don't make them do that, but that's an opportunity if it's a newer analyst and says, I was trained to do this, but I would like to see this again just to make sure I'm going to do it solid in there, but I need a little more. They could press play and watch that, that in that digital method execution, be able to watch that right there. I think that's a neat way in my mind of kind of bringing that expertise, right there, instead of having to go down the hall and saying, bringing someone over, which you maybe not be able to, the person is many thousands of miles away. Or asleep, because that's the other thing. We have time zones here. So they may be asleep when you're trying to do this. So, have that ability to have that visual learning, because that's so important to have that visual learning right there with you. I think that's a powerful technology in many ways. And I think that's one of the things we need to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, no, great point, because, you can make videos, as many videos as need be. Those people that need that little bit of visual instruction, need to watch it happen or take place, have that. The folks who are good with just reading about it, they already have what they need too. So it's a great format, because you get what you need as the learner out of it. How do we plan, Brian, for some of these same kinds of disruptions in our insourcing and outsourcing activities?
I think that first off, I think the recognition, right off the bat, that this is going to affect you. If you've been lucky enough to this point where you've had plenty of pass files and you haven't had to do anything to this point, good luck. Give me a call. I'd love to talk with you about how you got to that point. But I think we've all kind of had probably have dealt with this, and so I think it's the key is, in my mind, not forgetting. We are trained to kind of push that aside and to move on to the next thing. And I want to learn the lessons from this. And that's why, you talked at the very beginning that we make changes that are going to be forever kinds of changes. That's what I'm thinking about as well, that this isn't, thinking about a pandemic or thinking about people that are going out. How can we do things differently? Digital method scheduling. This is something that we're really intrigued about and we're really looking very hard at right now, because if you have someone, if you do a schedule, someone drops away, you've got to go to paper or go to Excel and figure out how you're going to do that. Well, if you have digital scheduling, that's not Excel, it's a real scheduling profile, you can drop that person out and plug someone else in. So these kind of technologies and these things are I think, going to outlast the pandemic, because we're realizing how valuable they are regardless of a pandemic situation. And so I think as you insourcing and outsourcing, it's about having more. Everywhere it's all about more. How do you bring in more people so yourself when people go out sick? How do you bring in other laboratories and bring in other places and make sure that you've got them available for when you need them? Right. And then you got to remember, right? It's not just about saying, going to a company and saying, I'm going to outsource this assay to you, and we're going to still run it ourselves, and we just want to keep you on deck in case we need you. You can't just call them up after 2 years and say, oh, by the way, we want you to test samples for us, and they're urgent. you've got to form relationships. So how funny is this that we're coming again back to the stuff that we should have always been doing? It's about relationships and making sure you've got that there and you're strategic about this. It isn't just saying, I'm going to outsource it, but now how are you going to manage that outsourced relationship? How are you going to make sure that they're really ready when you need them and keep them ready when you need them? And so there's some being thoughtful about this and budgetary considerations, of course, but about how you do this. And I think it's put on the lab manager and the lab director, where strategic vision and leadership was so important in the past. I think it's just become even more important now. I think what we know, we at the end, when we look at this and think about this, we ended up in a situation where it could have been much worse. And I think that we could have, thankfully, we haven't had, the problems we could have had out of this. And I think being thoughtful about that and kind of maybe playing some worst case scenarios where things get worse, which is scary to think about, but that you think through that so that you can figure out how you would address that.
Yeah, no, it's all part of the planning. And I love that you talked about soft skills too, because I think some of those things are hard to plan for. We take them for granted a lot of time, and a lot of our teams, our personnel, but they're what gets us through when we have
absolutely
major disruptive issues like with the pandemic. So I think that's important for everyone to consider, who are going to be the leaders, who are going to be the people that you rely on when these kinds of things go south sometimes. So
I can't wait to read the leadership books that are going to be written about this time period. I certainly have some thoughts on, kind of leadership that's developed that we've had to learn through this experience. But one of the things I've found, leadership is through all times is needed. And this time I think is no different. And we've seen it probably more so than we have had needed in a long time. So I'm glad to see that I saw a lot of people step up through this experience that I'm glad to see that. It was pleasant to see that happen.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I, this whole idea of, we're talking about cloud-based technologies, but yeah, we're talking about the people too, because we need both. I don't see us ever in our lifetimes, Brian, getting to a point where everything is automated, everything is handled with robots and virtual assistants and whatever you want to call it. And as we said right at the beginning, the changes that we're talking about today are likely here to stay, but in what form, right? So and we have to be mindful that we do have, talking about soft skills, we do have those folks on our team who are more experienced. They've been around the block a few times, more so than maybe your younger analysts coming in. And they have different ways of thinking about things. And some people by nature don't like change. They don't like to, they want to keep doing it the way they've always done it, right? And this has really been a challenge for those people with that mindset. So I'm just wondering, I want to get your thoughts and insights as to how we build a culture within our teams, as we evolve our labs, to better leverage cloud-based technologies, creating ecosystems with high agility and maintaining high quality. But how do we get those people to come around too and buy into this culture?
Yeah, my favorite change model is a very simple one. I kind of think that everybody, you've got about 20% of the people that are going to be for a change. And it doesn't matter what you're saying, I want to do something different. They're like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. I'm ready. And then you have about 20% of the people that are pretty much against it. You could have the best change in the world, and it's just, you're moving my cheese and don't move my cheese. Exactly. And so the success or failure of any change, agenda that you've got is all about that middle 60%. Which side do they listen to? And success or failure is really about trying to make sure the 60% are listening to the 20% that are for it and see the advantages and extolling that and making sure they're there. And I'm sensitive to the fact that one of the things that you've mentioned, and I think is very good, is that you have people that have been around and have experience and have seen things and can offer a lot to that up and coming generation of people that are learning and are sponges and are waiting for that. I'm also sensitive to the fact that these people that are at that young level are aware of technologies and things and ideas that just baffle me. And so I'm looking at that thinking, you can teach me a lot. And I think one of the trends that I've seen recently, and I'm excited about this, is reverse mentoring. It's a really neat concept, right? This idea that, that would, at a younger part of their career would mentor me and help me with what's going on there and give them perspective. I think that's a fascinating idea. And so when you talk about things about creative culture, it starts with values, right? It's valuing everybody's opinion. Everybody has something to offer the organization. I've never come across an employee in all the employees I've had throughout my career, probably thousands now. I've never come across someone that wasn't really coming in with the intent of doing their best. They may not have been a little misguided. It may not have been exactly focused in the right, but they're always trying to do their best. They're trying, and they've got ideas and they've got solutions for things. And I love creativity. And so I think a lot of it is about attitudinal changes, an attitude of we're about innovation. Mind you, we want to innovate, need to get ideas, collect those, and then process those. So I think anything, involves first you have to solicit for ideas. And people have to feel a safety to offer ideas. So you have to make sure there's a safety there that we really want ideas. And when people give you ideas, you have to do something with them. You either have to tell them this idea, we can't do this, it's too expensive, it won't work, or get clarification, help me understand how this could work or how expensive this is, or say, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's see about how we can. It. But you really need to resolve that idea. You've got to get back to them, because if it's a black hole, if you give the ideas and nothing ever happens, they hear nothing about it, why would I give you more ideas? And certainly even when the ideas come through, no, you can't do it. It's ridiculous. The budget would never allow it. Or, you have to be kind with those responses. You know what? I really appreciate this idea. It may not have, it's not going to work from a cost perspective, but thank you for offering it. You're thinking about things in a creative way. So I'm going to challenge you. This idea isn't going to work from a cost perspective. Here's a budget, or come back to me with an idea that will work within the budget. And so that way your kind of great brainstorming technique is to throw out a bad idea so that you can get to a better one. So I think sometimes those ideas that aren't perfected or maybe are really, really not going to work, they can be the groundwork for a very good idea down the line if you value that. So I do think there's so much of building that culture. You talked about culture is a value, is the value in the employees, the value in the ideas, the value in changing and improving that we find, and creating that overriding feeling. And it is a feeling, right? It's not something scientific. It's a feeling that people are going to have that you value their responses. And I think organizations take on the character of their leader. So if you, as a leader of a laboratory or another organization, if you're out there actively soliciting these ideas and you're showing people how you're implementing them and how you're listening, heck, just listening, forget implementation, just listening to their ideas, you're going to get more of them.
Yeah, great word. Value in everything, right? And everyone.
Value.
Yeah, for sure. I love that, because I think, to your point, everyone, if you ask them and listen, has an opinion. They may not work for your particular company or at that particular moment in time, but I'm sure everybody has their ideas and methods. And just to listen and kind of noodle on it as a team, though, I mean, that just shows them that they're respected, that their place in your team is valued. And when you build that into your culture, I mean, you get happier employees, and happier employees do better jobs.
Amen. I've always believed that.
For sure. Well, Brian, great conversation. I have learned a lot about the laboratory and some of the technologies in use, as have our audience, I'm sure. But before we close today, I just wanted to give you a minute or two, if you have any last thoughts or ideas, takeaways for our listeners today.
Yeah, I'm so passionate about laboratories. I've been in and around laboratories my entire career, and I think that hope that people today have gotten something from this. I'm sure there's lots of people with a lot of creative solutions, and we didn't talk about every creative solution that you can come up with. I think that building resilience is so important, and recognizing and really recognition, even taking a step back from recognizing resilience, just recognition, right? Is just saying thank you and telling people why you're thanking them. You need to do more than good job, right? It's thanking them and being, here's why I want to thank you for what you're doing. People are tired right now. They're tired of the pandemic. They're tired of dealing with this. They're just tired overall. And, as a laboratory leader, as a laboratory director, I encourage you to just get out there and say thank you. Talk to people, put a smile on your face and say, you know what? It's challenging. And I love your ideas. We're going to find ways through this challenge. Have that attitude that we're going to find a way to get better through this experience. So that's been experienced through this. And, it's what I try to instill at Seqirus is that attitude that we're going to be the best, and we're going to work through this challenge just like we work through every other challenge that we face. And there will be more to come later, and that we're going to be excited about this and do the best we can. And if that's usually, if you get the best out of people, you get them trying the hardest, they'll give you everything that they got. So I certainly hope that people have gotten something out of this, have learned a little bit from my experience. I would encourage them I would love to hear your experiences as well. So if you have some ideas that if you think what I've gone off, I'm just ridiculous, I'd love to hear that too. I think that we all are learning from a collective perspective. And that's why I say I'm in books. Maybe I need to go out and write one. I haven't got a big thesis yet, but maybe I need to go out and write one.
Yes. I agree. I'll promote that, Brian.
There you go. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're all better together, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Excellent. Well, thank you again to Brian Nunally for being our guest this week. Fantastic topic and some great insights. Also, I want to give a big shout out to our producer, Ben Kitchen. And lastly, a big thanks to you, our valued listeners. If you have topic requests or guest suggestions, you can message us via LinkedIn or through our website. And if you enjoyed today's episode, come on, you know you did. Head on over to your podcast player of choice and subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Plus, don't forget to share with your friends, colleagues, and online networks. We really appreciate your help in spreading the word. For today's show notes and resources from this episode, please visit www.ivtnetwork.com. We'll be back again next week with another great discussion.